Welcome to PPLS Perspectives, a podcast bringing students and academics together to explore the research carried out by the University of Edinburgh's School of Philosophy, Psychology and Language Sciences and the impact this work has on society.
Hi everyone, welcome to the PPLS Perspectives podcast. I'm Fergus and I'm a master's student in philosophy. Today I'm speaking to one of my teachers, Professor Matthew Chrisman. We're going to talk today mainly about Matthew's work in free speech and responsible public debate, and also the other areas he works in. Matthew has been a professor of ethics and epistemology at the University of Edinburgh since 2017, having first joined in 2006. His research includes work in socio-political philosophy, epistemology, ethics, meta-ethics, and the philosophy of language. Also relevant for today, Matthew leads the Responsible Debate project for the Young Academy of Scotland, and in 2021 published the Charter for Responsible Debate, subtitled Discussing Contentious Issues with Common Purpose. And we're going to talk about kind of 5 areas today, but we'll begin with an elevator pitch where we ask Matthew to summarise his research and perhaps particularly how it leads into his recent work on freedom of speech and responsible public debate.
Yeah, thanks so much, Fergus, for sitting down and talking to me about this stuff. I guess my career kind of started working on fairly arcane issues in philosophy of language, so I was interested in how our use of language interacts with ethics, and in particular talking about what people ought to do. And I wrote a book called The Meaning of Ought, and there was a sort of small piece that I wrote alongside that called Using Big Words to Explain Small Words, which is a phrase my mother used to describe my research. So
Excellent.
But I've kind of moved on from that a little bit. Something coming out of that book was thinking about the ways in which language is not used just to kind of describe the world or assert facts about the world, but also to express our attitudes and our reactions to things in the world. And so I was interested in the kind of difference between expressive and assertive and expressive uses of language. But a big idea in that book is there's a third way we use language, which is to commit to things, to take responsibility for things. And so I think that the commissive use of language is neither purely descriptive, purely expressive, or purely expressive. It's something kind of different. And so that's kind of my background in the philosophy of language, and that got me thinking about context where we do engage in dialogue with each other and commit to things. And I wondered sort of, well, when can that be seen as something one is freely doing, freely engaging in, as opposed to just something that either one's biology or one's culture kind of like causes one to do. So what counts as kind of free commitment, and in particular free commitment in the context of a kind of dialogue. And so that's relevant to the issue of what freedom of speech is and how to think about freedom of speech. And I think with any freedom, you can associate a kind of responsibility. And so then I started thinking about what counts as sort of responsibly engaging in the kinds of context where we do witness this sort of freedom to commit or undertake a responsibility to something. And so that got me interested in stuff about the nature of responsible debate, when debate is responsible, and how public debate can be conducted responsibly in a kind of political sphere. I think we'll get on later to some of the kind of controversial real-world topics that lead to that, but that was kind of the beginning of my interest in this topic.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, yeah. Why don't we just jump straight to that? What real-world problems do you see in this area, and when you think of the problems of free speech and responsible public debate, yeah, what comes to mind in the last few years, say?
Well, I guess I one of the instigations for this topic was witnessing some of the debate that went on in public and in politics, really, especially around the Scottish independence referendum and then the Brexit Brexit vote, and sort of thinking about the norms of the discussion. And I was talking to other people outside of philosophy, people who work in politics, people who work in linguistics, people working on peace and war theory, and we were all kind of noticing that there were interesting cases where debates seemed to kind of go well, where even if people disagreed, they still sort of heard each other and there seemed to be a kind of a point to the discussion, but so much public debate seemed like it, and maybe it's always been this way, but it seemed like it was especially bad around those debates. Seemed like it kind of degenerated into a situation where people weren't really engaging in dialogue with each other, trying to find any kind of solution or common purpose. They were just sounding off, as it were. And so that's those were the kind of initial debates. But then, I mean, once you have your eye on this, you see it all over the place. So we see sort of on our own campus debates about particular topics. We see in the ongoing sort of cycle of news, kind of every day, every week, there's some new controversial topic that comes up. And to me, it felt like often these discussions were pulling people apart. They were emphasizing or highlighting the most extreme aspects of different views rather than bringing people together. And I don't want to suggest that we need to always look for some mythical common ground or that the middle is always the right spot. But what I noticed even amongst sort of family and friends was either we kind of stopped talking about some of these controversial things, or if we did talk about them, they kind of pulled people apart from each other rather than helping them to find common purpose, a way of living together. And so that was the kind of real world problem that motivated me to think about this.
Mm-hmm. Do you suspect that kind of change was driven by the media environment and incentives in news output, that it became more about playing to one interest group or one side of the political spectrum and getting a monopoly on that group rather than trying to speak to the middle? And say when newspaper editorials was the key thing, you're trying to speak to everyone. That kind of
definitely. I mean, I think social media in some ways the kind of like fracturing of our media has led to a situation where people are competing for eyeballs, and in competing for eyeballs, often the best way that media companies have found, the best way to get eyeballs is to say things that enrage people or at least elicit like quite strong emotions, and the things that elicit quite strong emotions aren't always the kind of more careful, quiet thoughts that you might stand up for in a kind of debate with somebody you respected and wanted to find common ground with.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a unique problem with social media, or if it's just an enhancement of the problem of like Fox News versus CNN. Is social media uniquely polarizing?
Well, I think Twitter had a special role to play in this. Partly it's like short form, very whatever small number of characters, and the way that algorithms were driven around engagement, and they drove up engagement for things that sort of were most incendiary. And I mean, I think in particular the kind of short format made it difficult for people to convey nuance or express a kind of openness to multiple points of view. It had to kind of be starkly this way or that way. But I mean, I think that then itself reflected back into more mainstream media, and we saw newspapers and TV kind of take a similar turn.
Taking the lead from the social media networks. Yeah, exactly. Okay then, well, let's maybe get into some of your research on these topics. Perhaps beginning with first, just since it's the PPLS Perspective podcast, could we say a little bit about how you conduct your research as a researcher? Maybe it's a hard question for a philosopher, obviously, compared to an experimental psychologist or something. Yeah,
I saw that you were going to ask me this question. Oh no, I have to explain how I sit around picking lint out of my navel and coming up with new ideas. But you're a philosophy master's student, so you might as well learn how to do the navel gazing. So. Yeah. No, I mean, I sometimes find it helpful to think about what I do as thinking very slowly. So I've just completed a paper that's about suspension of judgment. So what happens when you are asked a question, is there a God, and you suspend judgment? You neither say yes nor say no. That phenomenon, suspension of judgment, which we engage in all the time. We're not sure what the answer is, so we don't yet say one way or the other what's going on in that phenomenon. And the genesis of this paper was reading a book that had something about it that I thought was wrong, and so writing down some notes about why I thought what the book said was wrong, sending them to one of my friends who also works in this area, and we had it back and forth, and that was about a year and a half ago, and we eventually wrote up a short paper and presented at a few conferences, got feedback on it, read other things that other people had written about the topic, spoke to each other about, what this person says, is that different or the same as what we think? Is this the best way to convey what we think? What's the right order for expressing these ideas? That became a paper that we submitted to a journal. It came back with 3 referee reports, people who very generously read our paper and gave us lots of criticism, which then led to another several months of us getting coffee together, talking about the referee reports, eventually starting the paper from scratch, kind of rewriting it in a totally different order, hundreds of emails back and forth. We have a folder with versions of the paper that has something like 55 versions of the paper that we've just sort of each time we've made some significant change to how we're thinking about it or how we want to present our ideas, saving a new version of the paper. We have also a document called the cutting floor where anything somebody's written that got cut out of the papers ended up on the cutting floor. So that, there's hundreds of thousands of words that have gone into creating this paper that's really about an attempt to kind of describe what's going on with a very mundane, ordinary bit of human thought, suspending judgment. And so none of that's running experiments or conducting surveys or anything like that. It's also not just phenomenologically reflecting on how things seem to me or how things seem to us. It's interacting, I'd say, dialectically through debate with, sometimes in real time, like we've presented the paper at a few conferences and gotten feedback, but sometimes in kind of delayed time by reading what other people have to say and thinking about what they would say in response to us. But so I think that's the kind of typical methodology of writing a philosophy paper, as opposed to some kind of empirical research.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, thank you. Well, yeah, that's good to know. It takes 55 drafts to get something so precise, because I've always wondered how do these papers look so accurate. It takes a lot. Okay. Well then, perhaps moving on to then something specific about your research. You had a 2022 paper titled "Discursive Integrity and the Principles of Reasonable Public Debate." And in this paper, you introduced the concept discursive integrity. I wonder if you could walk us through what that means and why it's important.
Sure, yeah. So my idea with that paper was that a lot of people had been focusing on people speaking in public, especially politicians, and whether they were sincere or not. And there was like a lot of focus on, does Donald Trump really believe what he's saying? Is he really sincere? Does Hillary Clinton really believe what she's saying? Is she really sincere? That was kind of the time period when this kind of came up, and I was thinking about this, and I thought, well, sincerity is good. We don't want people to sort of lie to us or sort of hide their true thoughts just to kind of pander to what they think we want. But that doesn't seem like it's enough, as I think maybe Donald Trump illustrates, to really reach some kind of a reasonable consensus between people who initially disagree about what to do on some topic. So we could imagine these political actors perfectly sincere. They tell you what they think, but still it then becomes just a kind of competition between whose thoughts sort of get the most airtime or get the most uptake. And in a way, Twitter had this effect too. I think often what happened on Twitter was, sometimes people did have reasoned discussion, but I think often what happened was people voiced their opinion and somebody else voiced a different opinion, and there was a bit of like a snowballing of which opinion got kind of more likes or more retweets rather than a kind of genuine engagement. So what I imagine with discursive integrity was that it wasn't sincerity, but actually kind of willingness to stand behind what you say. And so the way I think about this is there's 2 ways you can engage in that kind of discussion. One is you can express yourself. You can say what you think. But another is that you can make a proposal for what we should collectively think. And so if you think of what you're doing as making a proposal for what we should collectively think, then you'll see yourself as responsible to whoever the collective is to back up what you say with reasons. So if somebody says, well, why should we think that? Then you come with, here's why we should think that, reasons. And they say, no, I think we should think something else. And you can say to them, well, why do you think that? It's not, why do you personally think that? What are your personal reasons? What can prove that you're being sincere in what you're saying? But what are the kind of interpersonal reasons that you think suggest this is the way we collectively should think. And so when we do that, when we engage in dialogue with that kind of as our ideal, and this is kind of an ideal rather than, I think, something we can discern sort of in every case. But if that's kind of the aim or the ideal, if we're sort of aiming to manifest what I call the virtue of discursive integrity, then we're doing more than just being sincere. We're being prepared to back up what we say with reasons and to listen to others, not just as a fact about what they think, but as making proposals for what we collectively should think. And so that's what discursive integrity is. It's supposed to be contrasted with expressive sincerity. And my claim in the paper was that both were important, but in our contemporary political discussions, we were overemphasizing sincerity at the cost of integrity.
And is part of the worry that a kind of single-minded focus on just whether someone is being sincere, it kind of condemns us to the kind of mudslinging of politics that, well, they're just saying it because they want X, Y, or Z. Whereas if we discursive integrity, it seems like we're assuming in the grand scheme of things, we're all on the same team and trying to move forward politically in some way.
Yeah, definitely. So one way to think about it is that in the mudslinging politics, as you called it, we treat each other as merely further constraints in the world for getting what we want. And so I can notice that you want this thing and he wants that thing. It can be quite important to figure out what people want, to navigate between those to get what I want. But that to me doesn't feel like reasoning together about something or trying to solve some problem where we imagine ourselves, as you put it, on the same team. And so what traits of interaction with one another in dialogue would help us to do that better. And my thought was that I can at least give it a name. I'll give it the name discursive integrity and start to think about what constitutes discursive integrity and how that's different from expressive sincerity. And that was what that paper was about.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, and that seems to map back onto the initial concern about the Brexit debate, and maybe that one example of people trying to win an argument rather than actually have a discussion about what's best. Okay, perfect. Well then, how then, I wonder, does discursive integrity connect with an idea from a more recent paper, a 2024 paper? The concept here is epistemic self-realization, and the paper's titled Freedom of Thought. Can you connect that up for us?
Yeah, there's a few jumps between those two, but yeah, so I think freedom here becomes quite important. So if we think about ideal political dialogue as shaped by virtues of not just sincerity but also integrity, then you can ask, well, what does it take to kind of be a free participant in that kind of dialogue, or what counts as having the freedom to engage in this kind of dialogue? And I think there's a very strong idea in a lot of public discourse, and I mean it goes back eons in philosophy as well, that freedom of thought and freedom of speech is a matter of not being interfered with. So nobody clamps you down. You can write what you want to write in your newspaper. Nobody shuts you up. You can stand on the corner and shout whatever you want to shout. You have freedom of speech. Nobody's interfering with you, and that works if you think freedom of speech is that. It sort of works well with this idea that the way we ultimately come to collective decisions in a kind of polity in a state or a country is through some kind of what's called the marketplace of ideas. So we think there's just these different ideas that come together in this space of fractured contention. Different people disagree, say different things, and whichever ideas are kind of the strongest, in whatever sense strong you like, will win in the end. Whichever ideas can dominate market share will win in the end. And so if you think about sort of public discourse in that way, you'll think that what's most important is you have sort of access to the marketplace. Nobody's interfering with you saying things. You get to put your ideas out there just like I get to put my ideas out there. But I felt like that wasn't really enough to make sense of, first of all, what it is to be like a free thinker. What is it for your thoughts not to be manipulated or controlled by dogma or propaganda. And so I started thinking, well, what does it take to be a free thinker? And I don't know that I have a fully satisfactory theory of what it takes to be a free thinker, but my thought was that it required not just unfettered access to the marketplace of ideas, but something like being recognized by other people in one's community as a thinker, as somebody whose thoughts matter, as somebody who's, in a sense, allowed to propose things for us collectively to think. So I could think like the crazy guy on the street shouting things into a megaphone, like that's his right to do it, but I'm not going to really pay attention to him. And in a way, I feel like that attitude towards that person is not yet really to recognize them as a free contributor to our collective dialogue about how we should live together. So if we want a kind of a space of free dialogue, it should be more than just the marketplace of ideas. It should be something different than the marketplace of ideas. It should be a place where we recognize each other as contributors to this common project of figuring out what to think and do. And so then this idea of epistemic self-realization was a kind of fancy philosophy term for how I was thinking that we had to recognize each other. We had to recognize each other as potential contributors to collective knowledge, to what we can know together. Epistemic refers to knowledge. And so we had to think of each other as able to realize ourselves as potential knowers, potential contributors to this body of what we collectively know about what's the case and also how to act. And so not just having unfettered access to the marketplace of ideas, but being recognized by one's community as an agent who can contribute, as someone who has the potential of realizing themselves epistemically, to use the kind of jargon of that paper, was the important concept for thinking about first freedom of thought, and then I think it's also relevant for how we conceptualize freedom of speech.
Mm-hmm. It's maybe someone who was still taken with the idea of marketplace of ideas, would they say something like that, well, the best ideas will win out, and so society will be better off, because if everyone can freely compete and no one's inhibited from saying what they think, then the best ideas will take the day. How would you respond to that?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, this is why that paper is about freedom of thought rather than freedom of speech, is that I had the same thought as you're just voicing, and then came to realize that I think if the speech is merely expressive, so this goes back to my thing at the beginning about the difference between expressive and commissive speech, between just sounding off what's inside my head and undertaking a commitment to you to back up something with reasons. So if I'm just sounding off what's in my head in the marketplace of ideas, is there any guarantee that what's in my head isn't itself the product of some kind of manipulation or some kind of domination, or even just some kind of like biopsychological, it can tell some kind of biopsychological story about like why it is that I think that. And if that's the way we're thinking about people's thoughts, then it doesn't really matter what those thoughts are. There's a sense in which they're not going to be. We're not thinking about those thoughts as sort of free commitments to back up something with reasons. We're thinking about those thoughts as caused in some way by other forces. And so, yeah, back to your question, I guess, if all we had was the marketplace of ideas and we had some conception of why some ideas float to the top. Now, I think the kind of hopeful suggestion is that ideas that are more likely to be true float to the top. But I think the reality is that there's all sorts of political and cultural forces that mean that some ideas get heard and other ideas don't get heard, and so some ideas float to the top regardless of their connection to the truth. But even if we thought the true ideas tended to float to the top, if those ideas are the product of some kind of manipulation or coercion or domination, then there's no reason to think that those ideas then represent something we've kind of freely agreed to. And so that's why I thought we needed more.
Yeah, and maybe there's a sort of the marketplace of ideas subject worries about ideas moving around like memes, and they're adaptive and they just work and they become successful and popular. But yeah, that doesn't really mean we would wish them to be that way. Maybe it'd be useful to have an example. So say for instance, some controversial speaker is invited to speak on a campus, as has happened many times over the last several years, and there's worries about this speaker because they're a fringe thinker in some way. There may be protests. The administration's then maybe thinking about cancelling the speaker. How would you use this kind of toolkit to weigh into that kind of discussion?
Yeah, good. That's something I've been thinking a lot about recently, and I don't know that I have a sort of operational like set of principles that I think we can just like wield out and make decisions in hard cases. I think often there are hard cases, but the way I often think about those cases is that we shouldn't think about things this way, but it's often the way people do think about things is in terms of who has the right to speak, who has unfettered access to some space for expressing whatever happens to be in their head. And we talk about sort of like, well, making sure that there's both sides on the debate stage, and making sure that, well, if that film's going to be shown, then this other film gets to be shown, or if this thing's going to happen, then we also have a space for protesters. And I think there's I can understand the kind of practical value in some of those measures, but if all we're thinking about is making sure that there's, as it were, equal right to access the earballs and eyeballs and earbuds of the audience, then we're not yet thinking about what people are doing as making proposals for what we should collectively think. And we end up in a space where whoever can shout the loudest, say the most controversial thing, use other means for getting people to pay attention to them. Whoever can do that the best, whoever can kind of manipulate the audience environment the best, is the one whose ideas are going to float to the top, I think. And there's no guarantee that those ideas are going to be good ideas, because the reason they're floating to the top is not because they're defensible in any sense. It's because, for other reasons, it's because the person speaking has been given a certain kind of access to their audience, and been able to manipulate that access so that they people pay more attention to them than to anybody else. So I guess I would want to ask in these cases of kind of controversial speakers, like, do we have some indication that the person's here to argue for their point of view? Are they here to back up what they're saying with reasons? And one way to do that, and this is to maybe take back something I said just a second ago, but one way to do that is are they willing to engage with somebody who disagrees with them in a kind of debate? Will they stand up and say what they think, and let somebody else say why they think whatever they said was wrong, and then respond to that and have a discussion? And I think those discussions can often be quite fruitful. But if the idea is like, no, you have your film promoting issue A, so I need to have my film promoting issue not A. If that's the model, then I think we don't get anything like responsible debate.
Yeah, and then also maybe with the kind of process as is, there's the worry about who can shout the loudest, but then the other worry might be just that we just need to stipulate an arbitrary set of, well, these are the camps at large, and we're going to have a speaker from A and speaker from B. But the process of debate, with discursive integrity, as you're suggesting, is maybe more true to real ideas and real arguments playing out in a more authentic way, rather than just saying these are the teams, have at it. Yeah. Okay, well, maybe we can move to our penultimate topic then, which is reflecting on some of the work you've done in the public sphere on these issues. What has been your experience of taking these ideas in whatever format, whatever stage you have done, to the public and applying them in the public sphere? What challenges have you faced?
Yeah, well, so I mean, you mentioned that I'd been working with the Young Academy of Scotland on the Charter for Responsible Debate, and I think that was definitely a learning experience for me. We basically asked in a lot of people who have been involved in very contentious public debates, and asked them sort of what principles would you suggest that if people followed them, the debates you've been involved in would go better. And we got a bunch of principles, and we then workshopped those with various public groups, and honed and refined those until we had a charter. And that was a fascinating process to do, and I learned a lot by they call it knowledge exchange, by really like interacting with people who had ideas about how this should go, and then also then proposing the ideas that were somewhat based on my background theories, and then hearing what they had to say. But I mean, as far as challenges go, I mean, I think we've a couple of times we've used this charter to try to actually as a sort of rule book for an actual political debate, where we had party politicians and campaigners in to debate with each other, supposedly following these rules or following these principles. They read them beforehand, and getting people to read them is one thing. Getting people to kind of like take them up into their practice is quite a different thing. So I've been thinking a lot about like, well, so what do we do to cultivate these principles as like virtues in public space? And I think that's much more of an educational piece than publishing a charter and having people read it, or even inviting politicians to debate with it in the background. It's working on learning resources for kids in school. It's running things like the Ethics Cup, which I've been involved with, which sort of promote a more integrative, hear each other type debate. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the changing hearts and minds widely is difficult work and takes a lot of time.
I suppose that must be fun for a philosopher, though, to get out there in the world.
Sure,
That
yeah.
must be good fun. Yeah. Tricky, though. Okay, then. Well, thank you so much, Matthew. I think we'll perhaps leave it there. This has been the PPLS Perspective podcast. I've been Fergus, and I've been talking to Professor Matthew Chrisman. Thank you again for your time. And our topic today has been free speech and responsible public debate. Hope you've all really enjoyed it. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe or comment on whichever platform you're listening to. There are lots more episodes in the back catalogue you can go take a look at. Lots of interesting conversations. The PPLS Perspective podcast will be back next month with another episode. Goodbye for now.